course, Nigeria really waking up to perhaps a shock move by the CBN governor to raise the MPR by 275 basis points. That's, of course, to 12%, citing inflationary pressures as we have the expansionary fiscal budget for 2012 that has just come through. Also, of course, the weaker naira impacting on imported inflation. Your reaction to the 275 basis point hike?
Hello, Samantha. Thank you for having me this morning. You rightly mentioned CBN has been pretty aggressive in raising the MPR rate by 275 basis points. I think the CBN is trying to predominantly starve off or rather defend the naira. We've seen a lot of pressure on the exchange rate, and CBN believes that by pursuing an aggressive monetary policy, to maintain the exchange rate and stabilize prices, the naira should be a bit more stable. But I think that, in the immediate term, we should see some positive reaction to this development. But I think that the CBN and the federal government will really have to do more to stabilize the naira over the medium term.
Let's talk about what they have to do to stabilize the naira. Many were calling for perhaps a devaluation in the naira. Is that what you're insinuating? What type of measures do you think that they can install at this point in time?
I think there are two additional measures that the CBN can put in place, or the federal government rather. One is to try to diversify the economy away from oil. We need more sources of foreign exchange in Nigeria, which would help put less pressure on the naira. That's first. Secondly is, I also think that the federal government needs to fight it from a fiscal policy perspective as well, in terms of trying to resurrect the manufacturing sector, so that the economy would be generally more diversified away from oil. I think that's a more sustainable medium to long-term solution. That,
of course, is something that many are citing, but in the short to medium term, really, monetary policy has to do more and take on more of a burden. Let's just look at the decision to increase that cash reserve requirement for banks from 4% to 8%, a real sharp increase there for the banks. Bank liquidity not really homogenous across the banking sector. So which banks do you see being most affected by this decision?
I think most of the banks, really. The CBN has felt that generally there's been excess liquidity in the banking system and in the money market, really, which has contributed to a large extent in the high demand for dollars. And CBN feels that, by doubling the CRR requirement, that, there'll be less pressure on, on demand for dollars. I think that in the medium term, we should see some positive reaction to that. The banks generally would have to put more money with the CBN at, more attractive rates, which should reduce the pressure on the naira, hopefully.
But the CRR is considered to be quite a blunt instrument. Do you think that it's wise to be focusing in so much on the cash reserve requirements?
I think CBN has really tried to focus on three things. One is the MPR rate, which, like I mentioned earlier, has been moved to 12%. Secondly is the CRR that has gone up to 8% from 4%. And then thirdly is to reduce the open position limit to 1%. So there's been an 80% reduction from 5% to 1% of shareholders' funds. And I think fighting it from those three perspectives should help to, reduce the pressure on the naira.
So a three-pronged approach, I couldn't get that out rather. The CBN also continuing its investigation into forex dealers, looking to enhance compliance and supervision there. Are there any estimates as to the size of the black currency market in Nigeria?
I think it's difficult to put a size or a number to it, but I can tell you it's also pretty large as well. I think most of the informal sector really, purchase FX from the parallel market. So I think it's still an important market, but the size is difficult to, put an estimate to it.
Going forward, the CBN expected to maintain non-accommodative monetary stance, given the likelihood that inflation is set to tick higher. Where do you see the MPR going from here? And where do you see inflation going from here?
I think CBN has generally had inflation under control. We think that inflation will remain at single digits, for the rest of the year. However, the CBN may also be tempted to raise the MPR rates slightly, upwards in the near future to try to continue to defend the naira as well. But we think that overall, in the fixed income market and the money market, we should see, a 200 to 300 basis point rise in interest rates across board generally. So
you see, when do you see interest rates peaking then, the interest rate cycle peaking, as you say, by 200 to 300 basis points higher from here?
I think short-term interest rates, if I was to put an estimate to it, should trade anywhere or print anywhere between 13 to 14%. I think, at those levels, then, we should start to see a reduced pressure on the FX rate. So hopefully, CBN is on the right track. I think that more has to be done, but, they've started on the right track.
Very quickly, the equity market, of course, will be affected by the increasing yields that we're going to see on the fixed income side as a result of the hike in the MPR. How do you see this playing out in the markets today?
I think that the market is going to continue to remain soft and bearish. Investors are going to continue to switch asset classes back into fixed income. So I think that the downward pressure on equities would continue. But, on the fixed income side, we should see rates continue to remain attractive for investors.